Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, welcome to another episode of African News Review. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me as usual are my esteemed panelists. I'll begin with Fubara Eneli Esquire, author, Self-Love Revolution, Kwanzaa a Celebration, host, Rethinking Freedom on 98.5 FM, Killeen, Texas, co-host, Women and Resistance, and must add, co-host, Grill and Books. Welcome, sister.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
The Comrade is, grand wizard when it comes to our history, and he is Comrade Milton Allimadi, author, Manufacturing Hate, host, Black Star News, on WBAI 99.5 FM, New York. Welcome, Comrade.
Asante sana. Thank you.
Okay, as it's become customary, let's do news where you're at. Let's begin with the sister. News from Texas, please.
I'm actually going to do news from Nigeria instead of Texas.
Okay.
We just had yet another abduction of children from the state of Oyo in Nigeria. Children as young as 2 years old, teachers and children abducted. The kidnappers have absconded with these young people and their teachers, and have demanded that they speak only with the governor of the state and not with the actual family representatives. Kidnapping is a business in Nigeria at this time. Like, this is what some people do for a living. It's not clear, as with the girls who were the Chibok girls, the girls who were abducted from Chibok, who my sister actually worked with as a trauma specialist. Some of them have graduated, some had children, some have never been recovered. It's not clear whether this is the same situation because they took such young children. But they are asking for a significant ransom from the government of the state. And as of my last research, the president of the country has been completely silent. I don't understand how, when there was an attempted coup in Benin
Republic,
that Nigerian's government was able to galvanize within literally hours to go and intervene. And yet we have a situation where the most vulnerable in our community, teachers who are just trying to educate young people who are just sent to school to better their lives, have been abducted. And the president, as of my last research, has been silent. And this is, one time is too many, but this has been a repeated occurrence in Nigeria. Kidnapping, like I said, is now a business model, and it's very, very disturbing to my spirit that these things are happening and our government will not respond appropriately and protect its citizens. So yes, there are things going on in Texas. The felon-in-chief, sexual predator, adjudicated anyway, has endorsed Ken Paxton, who was impeached. Went through an impeachment. They did not remove him. Has been under all kinds of corruption, behind all kinds of corruption charges. His wife of many decades left him because of all his sexual infidelity that is documented, or allegedly documented, let me put it that way. And that is who Trump has endorsed in Texas for state senator over the other GOP candidate, Senator Cornyn, who is himself MAGA, but they just want to get the most decrepit people they can as possible, representing the Republicans in across this country. And that's just some of the news here in Texas. But Nigeria, my goodness, we've got to do better.
Okay. Comrade?
Yeah, so for me, I think there are two issues. The indictment of Raul Castro. They want to make sure they humiliate the Castro name
Yeah.
now that they cannot get a hold of Fidel himself, who joined the ancestors many years ago.
Yeah.
So they want to humiliate Raul. They want to have visuals and photos of him in cuffs in federal court in Miami. And then the second phase is, of course, they want to shift attention away from Iran. I think they're going to conclude a deal with Iran. Some of the elements of it have been coming out since yesterday. Supposedly, Iran will get its billions of dollars that were unfrozen. And a few weeks ago, they'd just been abusing Obama for unfreezing Iranian money and giving it to Iran.
And they're going to unfreeze even more than what Obama.
More. Correct.
Yeah.
So for that reason, they want to conclude quickly with Iran so they can shift attention to Cuba. So I think they will do something on Cuba soon. Maybe not a big invasion, but maybe they'll send another helicopter
to pick up.
Escort Raul to Miami. Otherwise, he might actually come on his own. So they won't have to conduct a raid. They may have agreed on something. Remember, a few weeks ago, the CIA director went to Cuba.
To Cuba, yeah.
He was not going there on vacation. So it seems something may have already been worked out. We'll wait and see. I am supposed to travel with the Pan-African Unity Dialogue, Institute of the Black World 21st Century, on Tuesday, I believe, for a 4-day visit to Cuba. But I will not be surprised if it does not happen, depending on how things transpire over the next many hours or days. So I will keep you, comrades, posted. So that's the update.
Okay.
On the story that you just shared, the absurdity of the times that we live in, what Raul Castro is being charged with, at the same time that Trump and Hegseth have killed how many dozens of people in the Pacific Ocean?
In the Caribbean.
Hundreds, right.
Have killed...
Oh, wait, you're talking about the targeting... Okay, both. Okay, right.
Both, yeah.
Killed U.S. citizens through ICE right here on U.S. soil.
Right.
Have killed other residents. So it's like you get to determine what is a crime and who gets to be held responsible, even as you are committing the same and worst crimes. And of course, we heard the news allegedly that Trump was trying to get Xi Jinping to go along with him on opposing the ICC because he knows he's probably going to be brought up on some charges relatively soon, at least I pray. Incredible. And of course, we see this is the same thing they did in Venezuela. Yep. First indict Maduro and then claim some legitimacy for going into another country and kidnapping the president of that nation and then holding hostage the resources of that country and the citizens of that country. And not a word, even from the international press. Incredible.
Okay. In the UK, it's been sad news. So first, May 13, the deaths of 3 sisters by drowning. Jane Adetoro, 36-year-old. Christina Walters, 32-year-old. Rebecca Walters, 31-year-old, from London, who were found off the coast of Brighton. The police is not treating the matter as suspicious, but then people have taken to the streets to protest the fact that the sisters not only traveled 73 miles outside of their own home from London to Brighton, but only to return, at least, in body bags, according to the police, and they're not treating the issue as suspicious. So that's one sad news that England is having to contend with.
Fully dressed, looking amazing. They are also of Nigerian descent.
Jamaican descent.
And yes. And all three sisters supposedly just walked off a cliff into the water.
Into the water. Yeah, that's what we're supposed to believe.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up, but the push is there for more information. The police is not forthcoming at the moment, but hopefully we'll get more out of them in the course of the week. That's one. Across the Irish Sea, reminiscent of what happened in May 2020 in Minnesota, the unaliving of George Floyd on camera, a Congolese man, Yves Sakila, 35-year-old, was knelt on and basically life snuffed out of him in front of people. He was suspected to have shoplifted, although that is still open for debate. But again, there are protests in the streets of Ireland, Dublin, in fact, and we see what comes out of that. And Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, after listening to people's protest, has blocked Palantir's £50 million contract with the Metropolitan Police. And so that is not going to be going forward. So we're safe for now, as it were. One news that broke from Africa yesterday was the fact that after the meeting of African leaders in Kenya, Senegal President Diomaye Faye fired Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko because they disagreed over how to go about the IMF debt and the re-examining of oil and gas contracts that was signed during the years of Macky Sall. And people would not be surprised.
Sonko would win. No, Sonko will win. In the long run, the Sonkos of Africa will win because that's the biggest decision ahead of us.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight. Yes, that's so. To both of you, I just want to ask this question: are you familiar with the release of claims that was brought out of the DOJ by Todd Blanche, which essentially created Corruption Incorporated with the slush fund that was supposed to benefit the J6s?
It's been legally challenged, so let's see what happens with that.
Okay. So that said, we go to our first story of the day, and
I do want to say though, for those three women,
mm-hmm.
I do believe they are of Nigerian descent, not Jamaican, and some of our viewers might want to check that. Adetoro is their.
He's a Nigerian name, yeah.
And their mother apparently drowned 16 years ago.
So that is what some people were saying.
Under some situations, again, that are unresolved.
Yeah. So some are of the opinion that there's an element of depression, but that three sisters would decide to go out the same way. Was it a suicide pact? But that's what the police is here to decide. So that said, we go to The Guardian for our first story, which is that Marco Rubio is criticizing the WHO. The headline reads, Rubio criticizes WHO Ebola's response as U.S. continues sweeping public health courts. The lead, U.S. Secretary of State, says WHO was a little late in identifying deadly Ebola outbreak in DRC and Uganda. It is that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Tuesday that the World Health Organization was a little bit late in identifying deadly Ebola outbreak in the Republic of Congo and Uganda. On Tuesday, Rubio told reporters the lead is obviously going to be CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization, which was a little bit late in identifying this thing, unfortunately. You've read the piece. What's your take? Does Marco Rubio have a leg to stand on?
I'll be very brief on this. No, really. This is like a bandit, a bank robber, saying, the bank managers to blame because they left the door open. Absolutely. You're cutting off financing. You withdrew your membership.
Yeah.
And you're saying the WHO did not do its job. It's so preposterous that it doesn't even warrant too much discussion. And here's the irony behind the whole thing. This is, once again, I blame on white European political correctness. They have their own version of political correctness. They insist on having their own version of history, wiping out African existence and participation. So because the WHO has the president, I don't know, is it the executive director, whatever the title is, the
Director
leader
General.
is an Ethiopian doctor.
Yeah.
So obviously, to the right-wing, extremist, Eurocentric constituency, it has political capital to go after an organization like that. You see?
Yeah.
And because of that, Eurocentric white political correctness, the world is paying a price, because you cannot isolate diseases like Ebola and say, it's only going to affect Congolese and Ugandans and only people of African descent and Africans. Diseases don't work that way. They have a way of reaching every part of the globe. Yeah. So, they're just being exposed further along with the hypocrisy, the, contradictions, but primarily the Eurocentric white political correctness. So that's my comment. But also I want to add this, because I never leave our African people without giving them the harsh critique they deserve. That after all these years, right?
Yeah.
They have not been able to develop a system to tackle pandemics such as Ebola, such as COVID. It's not mind-boggling, because we know neocolonial states are not geared toward the interests of the people. Look at the contradiction. Now the U.S. is destabilizing Cuba, this tiny country, population of 10 million, which was able to significantly intervene previously with Ebola, with COVID, with HIV/AIDS in Africa, and have some significant positive impact. So that's a two contradiction. The U.S. is going after a country that actually has expertise and should be working with the U.S. right now to see what can be done in Africa. They're going after them. That's one. Number two, it is a failure of all these African leaders who don't spare a dime when it comes to importing tanks, jet fighters, tear gas, machine guns, and what have you, but they cannot develop an effective mechanism to significantly fight against diseases like Ebola.
Sister?
To say that although I will not bury my head in the sand, every Sunday going through these stories, my blood is boiling. These are not just articles. These are human lives. And I was not raised to cuss, but I so badly want to right now. If there is a hell, may Rubio experience the worst kind of hell there exists. Whenever it is his maker chooses to end his life on earth, you are an absolutely despicable piece of a human being. Let me take a deep breath. World Health Organization, 9,400 workers across the globe, serving how many billion people?
8-point-something billion.
And you can fund a war. We don't even know the full cost, but at least $500 million a day. You can pay for lobster and steak and create a slush fund. You can write off millions at least in taxes for not just Trump, but every family member and any sister corporation connected to him. But you cut 2,000 jobs from the World Health Organization. You decimate their budget. And yes, shame on the world for having gotten so comfortable and dependent on what the United States of America does, because so many of us drank the Kool-Aid and really believed, for whatever reasons, that America is the land of the free, home of the brave, wants equality and democracy for all, even though their actual actions and their terrorism across the world shows a completely different picture. But you gut the World Health Organization. You don't end there. By their own accounts, the CDC, Center for Disease Control within the United States, the cuts could be as much as 40 to 50%.
Crazy.
Grants to do research fund, for research funding and so on and so forth, cut indiscriminately, actually very discriminately, to make sure that you're not providing access to the most vulnerable people.
Right.
You go into the same DRC and sign memorandums of understanding to extract minerals and a health memorandum of understanding so you can extract data. And African leaders not thinking about what will they use all this data for, all this genetic information, and how does that make you more vulnerable long term? And then you have the nerve to turn around now and say they did not detect it fast enough. You are destabilizing these places. You are making sure that there's no infrastructure in place. You are making sure, listen, when you talk about Ebola and how you contain these kind of contagious diseases, for any of you who have lived or visited places that are economically depressed, including when I lived in Harlem and when I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, and it was a brownstone that used to be a one-family home where there were now 14 families living in the building. All I could afford was a little efficiency. From my bed, I could open the fridge and I could possibly wash my dishes and open my closet at the same time. That's how contained the space was. Tell me, how do you isolate? I don't know about you. I grew up, quote unquote, middle class in Nigeria, and we were multiple children sleeping in the same room. If you said isolate what? So think of these places in rural America, in the urban areas of America, and then think of these African nations. How are we containing this stuff without this disease, without the right infrastructure? And so to create these conditions, and I also put blame on our African leaders as Comrade did, and then to turn around and point fingers like you helped engineer and create and maintain the mess. You are not concerned about infrastructure for the well-being of the people. You are concerned with how do we create pipelines to get their minerals out. But no humans are involved.
True.
And until we as Africans decide that our lives matter, we will continue to see these kind of things over and over again. By the way, let me just shout out all of the health workers.
Yes.
I'm praying for the spirit of people like Dr. Adadevo, who was the one who ensured that Ebola did not spread in Nigeria back in 2014, although it cost her own life. We are going to need these health workers on the front lines at risk to themselves to help contain this. We're also going to need decisive leadership. Remember when we did Women and Resistance and we covered Eileen Johnson Sirleaf? And she talked about the heat that she was under because she had to talk to the people about, under these circumstances, we cannot continue burying folk in our traditional ways because it would lead to more deaths. And so what we're also seeing with this Ebola outbreak is I think 2 clinics have been burnt down now. A plane was attacked. All of these things affect what kind of aid is now provided. But these are people who are upset because they have been barred from being able to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones to bury them in the traditional ways. So that we need leadership that can go in and educate people so that they understand the risks. Otherwise, yes, America, you cannot tell a contagion where it can go. It is going to get to you. You are not exempt.
That said, I'd just like to add also that Ituru, where is the center point at the moment, also happens to be one of the heavily mined areas in Congo. But
with no infrastructure.
Yes, and the materials are still getting out. So it goes to show
Are you kidding?
What?
Are you kidding? You think capitalists are going to stop bauxite from coming out, coltan from coming out, gold from coming out? No,
it's
not just because of a few bodies, African bodies.
Well, it's a lot of bodies. It's adding up. In just a couple of days, it's gone from 300 people infected to, when I looked at it yesterday, 600, 130 some people dead. Of course, we went from one case in Uganda, so it skipped up the border already, to now 5 dead in Uganda. And that is without the proper infrastructure to even trace and report the cases.
Yeah.
So, praying for, we need to pray as well. But African leaders, daggone it, step up.
Right. So Congo has lost they estimate up to 6 million people in the last 20 years. And in all this time, the capitalists have been extracting billions of dollars a year. So if they can ignore billions, the sad thing at the end of the day, it's going to have to be us as African people,
And we know what this virus is. So the fact that there's no vaccine in place, it didn't just show they have a name for the virus. They already knew it was in existence. There's a vaccine for one strain of the Ebola virus, and I don't even know how widely that is being disseminated, but there is no approved vaccine for this strain. We got to do better because we have smart people. We have people ready to work. We're lacking leadership.
True. And with that, speaking of capital, we go to Nairobi, Kenya. And the story is there is protest in the streets. Again, some might ask. And it is that protest spread in Africa as fuel crisis deepens. Sharp rises in diesel and petrol prices spark violent clashes in Kenya and Comoros and strikes in Mozambique. Rising fuel prices have triggered deadly protests in Kenya and forced countries across Africa to take emergency service measures as a deepening energy crisis drives severe disruption across the continent. Diesel and petrol prices at the pump have surged in recent weeks as the economic shock of the war in the Middle East starts to reach consumers across sub-Saharan Africa. This move last week by Kenya to raise diesel prices by 23% sparked protests in which 4 people were killed this week and a transportation strike that brought the country to a standstill, closing many businesses and schools. Was that one? Yes. Governments will need to continue managing regulated fuel prices in a way that protects security of supply while avoiding excessive pressure on public finances. Those are the words of Mark Russell, Chief Executive of Puma Energy. And we knew this was coming. So what is your take on it?
Okay. So I think for our, listeners and viewers, I think it helps to understand African stories that we discuss in a broader context. By now, maybe it's very obvious to some, but maybe not to others, that all the stories have a similar theme. And the main theme is that the failure for the people that are supposed to be in government to address all these issues. There are different issues, but at the same time, the theme is the same. Failure to address these issues effectively. We're not saying that all these challenges in Africa will ever all disappear, right?
Yeah.
The world does not operate like that. What we're saying is, in different ways, we're talking about the same thing every week for every story. The failure on effective, impactful delivery. So And it's common because of the common social, political condition that all these countries are faced. So that's why you started off by mentioning Kenya. And then you listed all these other countries because they're all the same. They have neocolonial governments that are not addressing the issues of the general public because their existence is dependent on the relationship they forge with the World Bank and the IMF. In other words, with the Western powers. Now the US is included, but traditionally was the former colonial powers. So I just want to remind listeners and viewers to think of that context and then see how it's related to every issue that we discuss on this show. So now, this is not a Kenyan story. You started off earlier by mentioning Senegal, remember?
Yes, I did.
Senegal is facing the same issue. Senegal has been negotiating with the IMF for many weeks now, many months, and the president wants a deal to be signed by the end of next month, by the end of June. The prime minister, Sonko, did not want that because he says, we already bled as much as we can from our people. The IMF, in order to release $2 billion to Senegal to remove subsidies on fuel. Right now, people are already struggling with the increasing price. And now the IMF says remove $4 billion subsidy so we can give you $2 billion, you see? And there's a contradiction. The president wants to do it because he knows without the $2 billion, the government cannot continue. The prime minister says our people cannot continue if we remove that subsidy. So one had to go, and of course the president is the boss. So he fired Sonko. The prime minister, Sonko. We're going to have different manifestations of that contradiction in each country that you mentioned. Kenya, will Ruto prevail or will the opposition prevail? In Mozambique, the price went up. Fuel went up by 46%. In Malawi, 140%. You see?
They're even selling their gold reserves.
Think about that. So the issue that Kenya is facing, Senegal is facing, all these other individual African countries are going to be facing. Ironically, there's a silver lining. Even though it's a very sad but true silver lining. And this is what's going to happen. Over the next 5 to 10 years, African states are going to be transformed. It's going to be very difficult to sustain the neo-colonial state as it currently is in African countries without reducing us to the kind of situation we're seeing in Sudan. So we are hoping that people like Sonko will be able to mobilize Africans and say, really, we cannot address these multiple issues until we change the composition of the state. The people have to be consulted. If you explain to them that we have to increase price by this amount while we adjust these things in our economy, they might accept. But you have one person, the president, and maybe his minister of finance, making these existential conditions. Do we say yes or no to the IMF? And they say yes. You see the consequences. Much more pain. Then the circles are saying, no, we can't go on business as usual. The people in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, that's the same thing they're saying. We can't have business as usual with the colonial states that control us. And that's what we're addressing.
Sister.
What did Thomas Sankara say?
Oh.
If Burkina Faso alone refuses to pay, I would not be here at the next conference.
Yep.
How long ago was that?
That's over 30 years now. Over 37
People
years.
who don't know their history will continue to repeat it to worse consequences.
Yep.
How much, all of these countries that we've just mentioned, what percentage of their GDP is spent on just servicing loans? Comrade, you just said further harm cuts resources to your people by 4 billion in order to get 2 billion.
Yep.
We didn't talk about the interest on the 2 billion.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
really, if we add the interest, it's going to be cut 4 billion to actually add possibly 10 billion in
Yes.
debt.
Absolutely. You're correct.
Again, if we can just for a moment pause and consider what 140% increase in oil prices, fuel prices in your community will do to your budget.
Think about it. Here in the U.S., it goes up by $1, and people are already
Losing
they're
their
signing a
minds.
peace. They're signing a peace deal with Iran because of that. So that's a good analogy. I like that.
Just think about it. 140%. You didn't even have enough money to live on in the first place.
First place, yeah.
They just did an analysis here in the United States where they said if you're making the minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, that in most areas right now, you can work an entire day and your take-home pay after taxes is not enough to fill up your gas tank. That is here in the United States. We have not seen even those kind of steep. I mean, certainly it has been steep. I filled up my tank yesterday, and instead of my usual $29 or so, I was now at $47. You better believe that hurts. And then when you drive to the grocery store and see that everything has exponentially increased. Talk less of when your government is now saying, oh, and then because of these external pressures, we are going to have to make even additional cuts. So now we're not going to be talking about 140% increase in your whatever your budget is with no money coming in, more money coming in. It's going to be when you add up all the other things that are going to increase. You're probably now at 300%.
Yep.
People can't get work. People can't afford food. It just goes on. Okay, having said that, because it's really important, again, when we're talking about Africa and so many of us are removed from this area, like put yourself in the shoes of the lives that we are speaking about. These are human beings. One of the greatest contradictions is that Africa exports crude oil, but imports
Refined.
refined fuel
Yeah.
at high prices.
Yeah.
So, of course, then that leaves us vulnerable to the machinations of, without being clinically trained, what looks like a demented, completely off-the-wall leaders like Trump and Netanyahu, without considering anybody but their own personal greed and ambitions, threw the world into this chaos. Now, we already had issues, but of course, we know that this war has exacerbated it. So Africans are in on their continent trying to mind their business. Now you've started a war in the Middle East. Now there's shipping disruptions. Now there are dollar shortages because all of our economic interactions are done based on the petrodollar. And so we now have to also absorb all these global price shocks. When you're selling, listen, if you're desperate and you're selling your property, guess what you're not doing?
You're not getting fair value.
You're not getting fair value. It's a dumpster sale. It's like whatever you can give me so I can feed today. For that reason, although he's problematic in other ways, thank God for Dangote and his vision and the one refinery that he has operating in Lagos when the Nigerian government could not for decades with the NNPC have a functional refinery. Thank God that there are talks to build another refinery in Eastern Africa. I hope that moves forward quickly. But we need solutions. We need regional refineries. We need shared refining agreements on the continent. We also need to be talking about strategic fuel reserves.
True.
And we need African-controlled energy supply chains. Africa needs cross-border pipelines, not pipelines that just go to the ports to leave. We need continental rail systems. We've talked about this before. We need regional electricity grids, and we have solar. We need to lean into renewable energy sources as well. Last week or 2 weeks ago, when our 33 African leaders came to sit with Macron and thank him for crumbs. Like, you take my whole loaf of bread and you throw me crumbs and I say thank you. The African continental free trade area, what are we doing? Where are those strategic conversations? And we've got to reduce this dependency on the US dollar. I wasn't very happy with what happened with the last BRICS planning meeting in India, because as you could see, they didn't come out with a coordinated statement. And so UAE, just like we've seen, the next story probably we're going to cover, is creating issues there as well. But Africans, we cannot just always be on the menu and never be the ones leading the discussions. I mean, I could go on and on about this. Bottom line is, I'm glad our people are speaking up. And I would invite African leaders. It will not be without pain. But we've got to sit down and look at these IMF and World Bank loans and all these private lenders and all of that. And we've got to figure out what are our options. Here in the United States, which the felon-in-chief took advantage of, we have bankruptcy laws. He was able to walk away from millions of dollars in debt due to the bankruptcy laws. Just walk away and not be responsible, to give himself relief to continue in other ways. African nations, we might need to sit down and say, can we keep paying over 50%? Imagine you get your check today and over 50% is going towards servicing debt. And it's increasing every year. How sustainable is that? Not at all. We have to have other conversations.
Yeah, that's it. So let me add a few comments on that.
Okay.
That's the solution that is required, of course. But it's not going to be done by the Musevenis, the Paul Bias, all these neocolonial agents who are governing most of these countries. And that's why I said that the silver lining, the protest on the streets by the youth, the increasing level of consciousness for people in Senegal who revere and respect the president, Faye, because he stood up against a system also that wanted to continue the neocolonial relationship between Senegal and France, and that's why they won. But he won because Sonko endorsed him and supported him. Sonko was prevented from running as president. He was locked up and they had some legal cases against him. So for the youth to realize that in this conflict between our president and our prime minister, the prime minister is actually correct. That to me is a very big sign. And that's why I say the neocolonial state cannot survive the way it is in Africa over the next 5 or 10 years. So it should not be episodic. They should come to the conclusion that we need to sit down and ask the question, what type of political systems in Africa do we need? How should they look, right? And should we continue insisting on having these tiny, marginalized, small countries, right? Obviously, the answer is no, we should not. Yeah. What more evidence do you need to come to the conclusion that in the next African Union meeting, number one on the agenda should be, over the last 12 months, what have we implemented toward coming closer to that United States of Africa? If you don't have that on the agenda, the youth should not even allow those meetings to continue. It's a waste of time, right? Just talked about leveraging resources. Every oil-producing country in Africa should say, in order for you to access our oil, you have to build a refinery.
A refinery here, yeah.
You have to build a refinery. In order for you to access all these minerals in Congo, you have to build a factory in East Africa so that Congo and the East African neighbors can start manufacturing as well. You know, and all of this can be done, but not by the Musevenis, the Paul Bias, the ones once they get the few million and put it in their private account, they'll sign any deal with anybody.
Okay. If you're finding value here, considering subscribing to the channel and do like, share, and do all the other good stuff. That said, we move on to second to the last story, and this one comes from The Guardian, and it's titled, The U.S. claims emergency refugee situation as he admits 10,000 more white South Africans. Trump has repeatedly made false claims that white Afrikaners are facing genocide with cost of resettling them at $100 million. The U.S. government has said it will increase the number of white South Africans it admits as refugees this year from 7,500 to 17,500, claiming that unforeseen developments in South Africa created an emergency refugee situation. The U.S. began admitting white South Africans as refugees in May 2025, while suspending the refugee resettlement program for people fleeing war and persecutions in countries including Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Sudan. In the year ending September 2024, the last full fiscal year before Trump took office, the U.S. admitted more than 100,000 refugees. There's the last part. The State Department said the South African government's rhetoric across multiple ministries and political parties have sought to undermine the U.S. resettlement program and attacked Afrikaners. Nevertheless, the conspiracy theory of white genocide has been a staple of the racist far right, which highlights incidents where white farmers were murdered. In recent years, this has been amplified by South African-born billionaire Elon Musk and right-wing media personality Tucker Carlson. You're well aware of the story. What's your take with the increase from 7,500 to...
Actually, I'm very disappointed. Why stop at 17,500?
I just move everybody in.
It should be 100,000.
Okay.
Good riddance, really. Good riddance. Let them be sent.
Okay.
Although there's a potential problem. The cost, the 100 million. I wonder how many European Americans know of this. Once that word gets out, there might be some domestic U.S. opposition, and this could slow down the this program. And of course, I don't want it to slow down. I want it to expand. I think 17,500 is a very small figure, in fact. The only downside, of course, is that under this racist policy, legitimate refugees who are trying to get away from legitimate conflicts are the ones who are losing out the most. So for the 17,500 European South Africans who don't deserve refugee status, of course, because European South Africans per capita income is higher than European Americans. European Americans could be maybe 80K. I'm just, I could be off by some tens of thousands. Yeah. But European South Africans, more than $100,000 US per capita income, right? Yeah. So, the rationale is completely nonsensical. But if they want to get them out of South Africa, I'm not opposed to that at all. What I would like to see happen is that the land, because European South Africans, even though they make up only 8% of the population, still control more than 70% of the land. So the land should be given to Africans in South Africa, right? Number one. Number two, stop beating and expelling or even killing Zimbabweans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, Somalians, especially Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans are experts in farming. These are the folks that can teach you how to farm that land that is going to be vacated, hopefully, by the European South Africans. In Zimbabwe, this is a story the Times will never tell. And it did appear once in one New York Times article, and never again. In Zimbabwe, when the Europeans were controlling all the land, I think the African population controlled only about maybe 30%. arable land. Yet on that 30% of the land, we're producing almost 80% of the domestic food consumption. Think about that. So they've acquired a level of expertise that can benefit every other African country, actually, right? They're the ones that can help liberate agriculture in South Africa. So if you connect the story together and you see it this way, yeah, let them go, let the land come to Africans. And if it's going to help them, by now revealing to them that your enemy is not really Africans from other African countries. Your enemy are the people who are still holding on to economic monopoly in South Africa.
Sister.
Talk about this topic. They want to leave.
I don't blame you.
Seize everything from them. Go. Ain't nobody begging you. Get the hell out quickly. And come to the United States and come see how we suffer over here, working 2 jobs just to try to live half a life. Come on over. See where you're going to find the cheap labor that you have been living like kings and queens on the labor of Black people. Come on.
Right.
Bozo.
And sister, one thing to add to what you're saying. Come, but renounce your right to return to South Africa. You can't come back. That's can't have your cake and eat it too, right?
You are a threat to our national security. Get out and stay out.
Okay, you've heard it. So that said, we come to the last story of the day, which comes from the Financial Times. And it's that this story is funny in the way it is framed. The Islamists, it comes from the Financial Times. It's titled The Islamists Battling Sudan's Ruthless Paramilitaries. The role of brigades that helped Sudanese army win against RSF militia has alarmed Washington and Abu Dhabi. When Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces rampaged across Darfur last year, carrying out massacres visible via satellite from space, global attention focused on the RSF's atrocity, not on the Islamist militias fighting alongside the Sudanese army. For the United States, Israel, and the UAE, stamping out residual Iranian influence and weapon flows and preventing the Sudanese Muslim Brotherhood from reasserting control has risen as a priority, not least because of their preoccupation with Red Sea security. But there's one other part. While the coalition is fighting on the RSF side, also now includes fresh recruits as former Darfur rebels and localized ethnic militias. Bohan relied heavily on the Islamist brigade to reverse initial losses. Amongst the most powerful were Al-Banna bin Malik Brigade, an elite combat unit affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood that has been officially absorbed into the army. The article follows this general thread. So the question is this: is the fact that they're combating the RSF a bad thing to Abu Dhabi, United States, and Israel? I just want to get my head around that article. That is why I brought it for us to discuss. Comrade, what do you think?
All right. So obviously, it's a question of who designates who is a quote-unquote bad guy and at what time, right?
Yep.
Gaddafi was a very bad guy for a very long time. And then at some time, he paid the compensation to the Pan Am victims, even though he insisted Libya actually did not plant that bomb. And there have been many credible stories in The Guardian, I think, as well, and Al Jazeera, that indeed Libya may not have been responsible for that. But he wanted to normalize relations with the West. So he paid that money. They had a deal, dismantled the nuclear weapon, became sort of a good guy, and then very quickly it changed overnight. NATO ended up destroying the Libyan state, hoping to steal its oil for cheap. But now, utter chaos, nobody can even get the oil anymore, right?
Yep.
Who is the president of Syria today? He was an ISIS leader, right? He was a commander of ISIS. But now he's been rehabilitated. Now he's a good guy. A few months ago, he was at the White House. A few months ago. A few years ago, He was the one that saying was beheading people alive,
Western.
with the West.
Western. Yeah.
You see the contradiction? This is what I call the Osama bin Laden paradox. And for people who have forgotten, Osama was built up in Afghanistan, trained. His movement was pumped tens, if not hundreds of millions of US dollars and weapons because they were fighting Najibullah, the Soviet-backed leader of Afghanistan at that time.
Yeah.
He only became a good guy after they got rid of that government, and now he focused the skills that taught him, right, on the U.S. with the tragic consequences of the 9/11 attacks. So for the West to be saying, and of course I'm not supporting the armed forces of Sudan in the fight against the RSF, because this is a problem that both of them started. They had a transition system that was ongoing in Sudan that involved half civilians, those young people we saw protesting that got rid of dictator al-Bashir. They had an arrangement that was transitioning between them and involved the RSF and the armed forces of Sudan. Yet these two guys started fighting, RSF and ASF, 3 years ago and ended that transition. So both of them, are devils and devilish, right? Even though ironically now, RSF has committed such horrendous atrocities that people are hoping that the armed forces of Sudan prevail and that they'll hopefully have learned a lesson and this time have an authentic transition process. So that is the thinking behind some people who are favoring the armed forces of Sudan, not because they're angels in any way, but as the article also implies, that the lesser of two wicked, evil forces. But for the West to say, wait, armed forces of Sudan, why are you aligned with Muslim Brotherhood, and so on and so forth? You are the ones who have made ISIS leader, president in Syria. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You're the same people who told us Mandela was a terrorist. And you gave the South African intelligence the tip. The CIA are the ones who tipped South African intelligence. And that's how Mandela was arrested in 1960, if anybody has forgotten that. All right, but that's my 2 cents on this article.
So, sister, you have a contra take or you agree?
Of course I agree. Our master teacher is teaching. What are you talking about? But, to the point of what he was saying, was Saddam Hussein not funded by the United States until he became a Hezbollah? Was Hezbollah not funded by Israel to weaken and eradicate the PLO?
Yep.
The playbook is there, and they keep going back to it, and we keep going.
Shock.
Wait a second. How did the Muslim Brotherhood become an issue now, in this moment, to be now labeled as terrorists? Does it have anything to do with this war against Iran and the link between the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran and the funding sort? Come on now, people. We used to say reading was fundamental. It really is. And I get it. I get it. The way life is coming at us, we're so busy just trying to live.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Down and taking information to synthesize information is difficult. I mean, for me to do it, I'm sometimes giving up sleep. So I understand it, but we have a responsibility for our own lives and future generations to stop for a second and say, wait a second, what am I seeing? Where are all the pieces on this chessboard? And how do they interact with each other so that we're not confused? Now, let's go back to the very beginning. Someone in the chat talked about the 12 wars in Sudan. Understand that this is more than a civil war. This is a struggle over our land, over our resources, gold in particular. Understand that there's a racial element to this in terms of, are the Black Africans versus the Arabs. Understand that there is a religious component to this. Understand the foreign influence. And understand ultimately this is about African sovereignty. Do not get this confused. Ask yourself, what the heck is RSF doing with the UAE? Why is the UAE, this small place, so invested in Africa? And what are they trying to get out of it? The violence with Omar al-Bashir is racialized. They identified communities as non-Arab and they targeted them through massacres, through displacement. And as a woman, I have to speak about the rape.
Right.
Because these are things that then linger generationally. Sudan is yet another example of what happens when African resources are globalized and we're not even really the ones in control, but our lives are disposable. So, coming back to some solutions. First of all, any solution that does not have women at the table as participants, not just major voices in brokering whatever piece is going to be there, it's not going to work, because all too often we're bearing the brunt of these decisions that men who are in a struggle to show whose, and I'm going to be crass, penises are bigger.
Yep.
We're the ones bearing the brunt.
Absolutely.
So
I agree
Africans,
100%.
we need to be talking about an arms embargo enforcement against all the parties, particularly scrutinizing what are the weapon routes through these neighboring states and the Gulf-linked supply chains. If you're going to sanction SAF and call the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists, please, by all means, put that same label on the RSF commanders. We also need to figure out who are these militia financiers, and it is not that difficult. Who are the gold traders? Who are the banks and aviation companies and foreign entities that are enabling all of these atrocities? These things aren't being done in a vacuum. We must provide counseling and a humanitarian response to the women and the children. Rape crisis care, emergency contraception, maternal care, trauma counseling, self-shelters, and how we protect these survivors. African Union, I know that there are lots of issues to be addressed, but they're actually all interconnected. Like if you start working on one, it actually has a domino effect in positively affecting all the other issues. And then there's got to be international accountability. We must preserve the evidence of genocide. We must preserve the evidence of crimes against humanity, of the sexual slavery, of the ethnic cleansing. I'm going to stop there.
All right.
There are no easy answers in Sudan, but we must face these issues, because how much longer? How much longer? We keep talking about Africa is the future, how young the generation, how young the population is in Africa. What happens when we have a continent of deeply traumatized young people who are also uneducated? Because you cannot really get an education in the midst of this chaos.
You continue
We're
the vision.
basically creating a class of people who are going to be so vulnerable to be re-enslaved.
Yeah, and you create that vicious circle of persistent violence, because that becomes the language of interaction, violence. So, yeah.
All right.
And
So
the fact...
I want to add that this takes me back to what I said earlier, that in all of this, we have to see the silver lining, that definitely the continent is going to be fundamentally transformed over the next 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. There's no way out. And the good thing with the Sudan, they have some of the most righteous, most efficient intellectuals and activists and organizations and unions, more so than in any African country. The Sudanese were able to overthrow 5 or 6 military governments by organizing. And that is part of the fear of the armed forces in Sudan, that the dominating rule imposition over the country was going to end at the end of this transition. And women were in the leadership positions in that transition as well. Many of us remember those protests in the streets. All the young women who were coming out on the streets, even though many were being killed, came out again and again. So the future, at some point, we have to go to this horrific, sadly, bloodshed, which we're seeing. But I am hopeful that at some point, some of these brilliant Sudanese, I know many of them, one of them is a very good friend of mine, who was actually, this is the irony, she had not been home for about 4 or 5 years. She finished her PhD. She got married. She had a son. So went home finally to introduce her son and family to their family after she hadn't been there for years. And while she's there, 3 years ago, that April, this war begins. Trapped in Khartoum for months, posting on social media on a daily basis because thinking each day might be my last posting.
Last day. Yeah.
But managed to escape with her son and is now back teaching in Canada. So these are the kind of people that will eventually go back to recover their country.
If I could just add something, I wonder, we covered this story about GERD in Ethiopia and how when the IMF denied them a loan, the people of Ethiopia within and out came together and funded what they needed. We have many success stories in Africa, but we need to go and study those success stories and replicate it over and over again. So when we talk about this fuel crisis, when we talk about our health crisis, when we talk about any of the challenges we're facing, we actually have the answers, the solutions to our own problems. If we just turn internally and build up that willpower to say we are going to solve our own issues. And by the way, that goes for Africans in the diaspora, even where we are, quote unquote, in the minority. When we unite in with one vision, we are absolutely unstoppable. I want all people of African descent, wherever we are, to know that if we could be killed and erased, it would already have been done. Because think about everything that has been thrown at us.
Yep.
And not only are we still alive, we are the future. By all of their indications, which is why they are so desperately coming against us in so many forms. And we see that here in the United States of America. Right. I want to say to those who are watching, thank you for supporting this. Please put your comments in the chat because it helps with the quote unquote algorithm so that more people see this. And I want to give a shout out to the person who is on here who's so full of hatred for themselves. I don't know who they are. Salazarim something. Thank you for all your absolutely weaponized ignorance in the chat that shows either how deeply you hate yourself or your deep-seated hatred for people of African descent. Because everything you've put in the chat here shows where your mindset is. Thank you for helping the algorithm and for helping us to get our message out here. You are very, very useful to us.
Yeah, but sister, remember, if you go to YouTube and you listen to the Ballad of the Bullet, how does Malcolm begin that speech? He thanks everybody and he says, including our friends and our enemies.
Yes, thank you.
And people clap. And then when it dies down, Malcolm says, you'll be out of your mind if you didn't believe that there were also enemies in the house. And Malcolm said that is a sign of achievement, that what you are saying and communicating is worth the enemy wanting to know about as well. So if it was good for Malcolm, I think it should be good for us as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'll join the sister in saying thank you to Salazrim. Thank you for coming through. Your contribution is noted.
No, let's shout out the real folk, Gregory Jones, and because sometimes the people trying to suck the oxygen from the air, and let's see, there's so many others. I think I saw June Liggins, and I saw Mama Peggy, and so many others. If you're listening, go ahead and put something in the chat. because we appreciate your presence here. John Fain, African man, Parentino. Yeah, thank you all for being a part of this.
Yes, and that's Wednesday.
Ahmed, I'm just seeing some more names here. We appreciate you all. We don't want to just call out the knucklehead in the chat.
Thank you.
Ciara is also on here. Ciara at Splash. Thank you all. And if I missed your name, please just still know that I appreciate you.
So we continue with Women and Resistance on Wednesday. We're going to be highlighting the role of Maneme on Wednesday. Yeah, Cheryl Jackson as well. Thank you for coming through. Yeah, that said, we've come through on Saturday. We're going to be coming up with a special episode of Grew and Books. We're going to be highlighting, reviewing the classic, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. And very interesting stories. Do join us for that. That's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday. It's going to be Things Fall Apart. And that said, Comrade, final thoughts?
Asante Sana, please support this platform. I always look for silver linings because the sister said, if we could have been made extinct by now, it would have already been accomplished. So the future is bright.
Thank you. Sister?
I want to give a shout out. Starting on May 25th on Rethinking Freedom, we have a summer series going that is going to look at the untold histories of the United States of America at 250. Because some of you may know that America is supposedly celebrating its 250th anniversary. So the other side of freedom. And tomorrow we are going to be featuring E.R. Bills, who wrote the book, The Telltale Texas, Investigations in Infamous History. And I guarantee you that you are going to be learning about things that you did not hear in any history class. He's based here in Texas. Many of the stories are Texan stories. However, we see that the playbook is the same wherever we are. So please join us on our Rethinking Freedom platform on YouTube.
Thank you. And yes, that said, we continue the work and we'll see you next week. And until then, it's good night and God bless. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.